Edward Fisher arrived home earlier than usual and caught the maid doing something that left him in total shock. Claire Sanders was in the garden with Luke, his 3-year-old son with cerebral palsy. But what she was doing with the boy was considered impossible, according to every doctor. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Luke, who had never managed to stand on his own, was smiling and balancing on his purple crutches, standing in a puddle of water while Claire gently encouraged him. "This can't be happening," Edward whispered, holding his head in despair. 3 years of extremely expensive treatments with the best specialists in the country. And yet a maid had achieved in 1 week what no one else had ever been able to do. But Edward had no idea that Claire was hiding a secret that would change their lives forever. Edward remained frozen for long seconds, staring at the surreal scene unfolding before his eyes. Claire was still kneeling beside Luke, her soft words echoing through the quiet morning garden. "Look how strong you are today, Luke. Your little feet are firm on the ground like a true warrior." Claire's brown eyes shone with genuine pride. Luke laughed again, swaying slightly but keeping his balance on the crutches. It was the first time in months Edward had seen his son show such joy and hope. Edward moved closer slowly, careful not to break the magical moment. Each step was calculated, as if approaching a wild animal that might run away at the slightest sound. That's when he noticed something even more extraordinary. Claire had created a little path in the garden using colorful stones and flowers. Luke was following it, taking small steps with his crutches, but with far more confidence than Edward had ever witnessed before. "Auntie Claire, I made it to the yellow flower," Luke exclaimed, pointing at a small sunflower strategically placed at the end of the path. "You did it, my prince. And now let's go to the blue stone. Do you remember what Auntie taught you?" One step at a time, breathing deeply, Edward felt a lump in his throat. Since Luke was born, he had hired the best professionals money could buy, renowned physiotherapists, state-of-the-art equipment, even experimental treatments abroad, all in the hope of seeing progress in his son's motor development. Yet here was a maid he had known for just a week, achieving results that seemed impossible. Claire suddenly noticed Edward's presence. Her smile vanished instantly when she saw his shocked expression. She stood up quickly, smoothing her blue uniform nervously. "Mr. Edward, I wasn't expecting you this early," she stammered, clearly worried about his reaction. "What are you doing with my son?" Edward demanded, his voice harsher than he intended. Luke, sensing the tension in the air, became uneasy. "Daddy, Auntie Claire was just helping me play adventurer." Edward looked at his son, then at Claire, then back at Luke. The boy was radiating an energy he hadn't seen in so long. His cheeks were flushed from the exercise, his eyes sparkled with excitement. And most importantly, he was showing motor coordination every doctor had said was impossible. Edward," Claire began. "I know this wasn't my role, but Luke always seemed so sad, always alone in his room. I thought maybe a few simple games in the garden. How long have you been doing this?" Edward interrupted, his mind overflowing with questions. Since the second day I started working here," she admitted, lowering her eyes. "I know I crossed the line, but he showed so much interest when he saw the flowers." Edward ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything. 1 week, just a single week. And this woman had managed to awaken abilities in Luke that 3 years of intensive treatment had never achieved. But who exactly was Claire Sanders? And why would a maid know techniques that specialized physiotherapists didn't? Edward was about to discover that there was far more behind this humble woman than he could ever imagine. He watched Claire help Luke put away his crutches and head back inside, promising the boy they would continue their adventure after lunch. Meanwhile, painful memories began flooding his mind, dragging him back to the day that had changed his life forever. 3.5 years ago, Edward Fisher had been a different man. Married to Helen, the woman of his dreams, they had built a solid business empire together and were eagerly awaiting the arrival of their first child. Helen radiated happiness throughout her pregnancy, making plans for the baby, decorating the nursery, dreaming of their family's future. "Edward, our son is going to change the world," she would say, caressing her growing belly. "I'm certain he'll be special." She had no idea how prophetic her words were. Labor began one December morning, seemingly normal. Edward held Helen's hand throughout the process, whispering words of encouragement. But when Luke was finally born, the silence in the delivery room was deafening. "There are complications," the doctor murmured, examining the newborn. "The child shows signs of cerebral palsy, and there are additional complications with the mother." Edward remembered perfectly the moment his world fell apart. Helen began hemorrhaging severely. Doctors rushed, machines beeped, voices grew desperate. He was pushed out of the room, holding Luke in his arms, not knowing if his wife would survive. She didn't. In just a matter of hours, Edward went from being a hopeful father to a widowed man with a newborn who would require special care for the rest of his life. Helen died without ever holding her baby in her arms. The months that followed were the darkest of Edward's life. He buried himself in work, hiring a succession of specialized nannies to care for Luke. Each arrived with promises and innovative methods, but Luke remained apathetic, isolated, showing little progress. "Mr. Edward, it's important to keep realistic expectations," Dr. Miranda, the pediatric neurologist, had explained during a consultation 6 months earlier. "Children with Luke's degree of cerebral palsy rarely develop significant motor skills. The most we can hope for is that he learns basic communication." Those words echoed in Edward's mind as he replayed the scene he had just witnessed. Luke was not only communicating, he was laughing, interacting, and displaying motor coordination that was supposed to be impossible. Gradually, Edward had resigned himself to the idea that Luke would always be dependent, limited, incapable of living a full life. He himself had become a distant father, providing the best medical care money could buy, but avoiding emotional connection with his son to protect himself from further disappointment. The mansion had become a silent place, where Luke spent most of his time in his adapted room, surrounded by special toys and therapeutic equipment that were rarely used. Edward left early for the office and returned late, checking that his son was well cared for, but keeping a safe distance. Until Claire Sanders appeared. Edward shook his head, trying to drive away the painful memories. He glanced out the window and saw Claire preparing Luke lunch in the kitchen, softly humming a tune. There was something about her, a genuine maternal energy he hadn't seen since Helen. But who was this woman who, in just a week, had managed to awaken his son in ways that years of treatment never had? Edward was determined to uncover the truth about Claire Sanders, even if it meant confronting secrets she was clearly hiding. Claire Sanders nervously adjusted her uniform while preparing Luke lunch. Her hands trembled slightly as she chopped vegetables into small pieces, not from inexperience in the kitchen, but from the tension of knowing Edward had caught her doing something far beyond her duties as a maid. What Edward didn't know was that Claire had lied during her job interview. 5 years earlier, Claire Sanders hadn't been just a domestic worker looking for employment. She was Claire Sanders, a pedagogue specialized in inclusive education, with a degree from USP, a master's in child development, and expertise in working with children with special needs. She had worked in one of Snow Paulow's most prestigious clinics, recognized for her innovative methods and extraordinary results. Her life had been perfect. She had her dream job, a fiancé she loved, Michael, also a pedagogue, and had just discovered she was pregnant with their first child. The world seemed to be smiling at her, until tragedy shattered everything. Michael was returning from a lecture on childhood autism when a drunk driver ran a red light. The accident was instant fatal. In a matter of seconds, Claire lost not only the love of her life but also the baby she carried in her womb due to the devastating emotional shock. "I'm sorry, Claire," the doctor had said that terrible night. "The traumatic stress caused a miscarriage. You've lost the baby." Claire never fully recovered. She tried returning to work at the clinic, but every child she treated reminded her of the son she would never know. Each child's smile was a stab in her shattered heart. Every small therapeutic victory only deepened her pain. 2 years after the tragedy, she abandoned everything. She left behind her brilliant career, sold the apartment where she and Michael had once been happy, and moved to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. She decided she would never again work with special children. The pain was simply too great, but destiny had other plans. When she saw Edward's ad searching for a maid, something in the description caught her attention. Home with a child with special needs, quiet environment, responsible and caring person. It was as if the universe was testing her resolve to stay away from that world. On her first day of work, when she saw Luke alone in his room, his thin legs supported by purple crutches, his sad eyes staring into emptiness, Claire felt her heart shatter again. But this time, instead of running away, something awakened inside her. Maybe, she thought, I can honor my son's memory by helping this child. In the following days, while Edward was at work, Claire discreetly began applying techniques she had learned during years of specialization. She created playful exercises disguised as games. She set up motor stimulation routines masked as garden adventures. And most importantly, she gave Luke something he had never truly received before: genuine attention and positive expectations about his abilities. And I also want to take a moment to thank all of you who are following this incredible story. Your comments and support mean so much to me. It's this positive energy that motivates me to keep sharing stories that touch our hearts. Thank you so much. Now, while Claire finished preparing Luke lunch, she knew she could no longer hide her true identity from Edward. Luke's progress was too obvious, and the father's questions would only keep growing. But revealing the truth would mean confronting not only Edward, but also her own demons from the past, and admitting that she had found a new reason to live in the form of a special little boy who called her Auntie Claire, with a smile that could brighten even the darkest days. Edward couldn't focus on work for the rest of the day. The image of Luke smiling and balancing on his own wouldn't leave his mind. At 3 p.m., he made an impulsive decision. He would return home early and have a serious conversation with Claire Sanders. When he arrived at the mansion, he found Claire in the garden again, this time helping Luke plant magic seeds. In reality, a fine motor coordination exercise disguised as play. The boy was sitting in a small adaptive chair, using his hands with precision Edward had never seen before. "Claire, I need to talk to you." "Now," Edward said, his voice carrying the weight of business authority. Claire immediately stood up, her nervousness written all over her face. "Of course, Mr. Edward. Luke, how about you continue planting the seeds while I talk to your dad?" They went into the office. Edward shut the door and stood behind his desk, taking on his intimidating business posture. Claire remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her body. "Who are you, really?" Edward asked directly, no hesitation. Claire took a deep breath. She knew this moment would come. Edward, I can explain. You can start by explaining how a maid knows physiotherapy techniques that even specialists don't. How can you achieve in a week what highly paid professionals couldn't in 3 years? The silence stretched for long seconds. Claire lowered her eyes, fighting back the tears welling up. "I lied during the interview," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward felt a mix of anger and curiosity. "Go on." "My name is Claire Sanders, but I'm not a maid. I'm a pedagogue specialized in inclusive education with a degree from USP and a master's in child development." Edward stayed silent, processing the information. Claire continued, the words pouring out in a rush. "I worked for 5 years in a child rehabilitation clinic. I was recognized for my innovative methods. Everything I'm doing with Luke are techniques I developed and applied with hundreds of children. Then why did you lie? Why would a qualified professional disguise herself as a maid?" The tears finally spilled over. "Because I stopped working with special children 2 years ago. I couldn't anymore. It was too painful." "Painful how?" Edward pressed. Claire drew a deep breath, bracing herself to reveal her deepest wound. I lost my fiancé and my baby in an accident. After that, every child I treated reminded me of the son I never got to know. I abandoned everything. I swore I'd never work in this field again. Edward felt his anger shifting into something entirely different. Then why did you accept this job here? Because when I saw Luke that first day, alone, sad, underestimated by everyone, I saw a chance to honor my son's memory. And I discovered that maybe I still had something to give. Edward walked to the window, watching Luke in the garden. The boy was trying to reach a tall flower, stretching his arm with determination he had never shown before. You lied to me, Edward said without turning. Yes, you misled me about your qualifications. And yet, in a single week, you've done more for my son than anyone has in 3 years. Claire didn't answer. She only cried silently. Edward turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Claire, I need to know. Are you doing this out of pity? Out of guilt? Or do you genuinely believe Luke can improve? I believe Luke can have a full life, Mr. Edward. Not only do I believe it, I'm certain of it. But it will only happen if he's treated as a capable child, not as a lost cause. At that moment, Luke appeared at the office door, holding a flower he had managed to pick on his own. Daddy, Auntie Claire, look what I did, he shouted proudly. Edward looked at his son, then at Claire, and made a decision that would change everything forever. Edward looked at Luke, proudly holding the flower, then at Claire, whose eyes were filled with tears, and he made the most important decision of his life as a father. Claire, you're fired, he said, making her heart shatter instantly. The silence was deafening. Luke didn't fully understand, but he felt the tension in the air. From now on, Edward continued, you are officially hired as my son's special development coordinator, with the salary that a professional of your qualifications deserves. Claire placed a trembling hand over her chest, unable to believe what she was hearing. Mr. Edward, Nothing of Mr. Edward. Call me Edward. And I want you to teach me everything about Luke's condition. I want to actively participate in my son's development. In the weeks that followed, the mansion transformed completely. Edward canceled meetings to join Luke therapy sessions. Claire created a structured program that combined physiotherapy, cognitive stimulation, and above all, love and positive expectations. Luke, today we're going to work on dynamic balance, Claire explained during a morning session. Daddy will hold one of your hands while you try to take 3 steps without the crutches. I can do it, Auntie Claire. Daddy, did you see how strong I've gotten? Luke said, his eyes glowing with determination. Edward held his son's small hand, feeling a connection he had avoided for years out of fear of disappointment. I see it, champ. You're stronger every day. Luke's progress was exponential. In 2 weeks, he was able to stand for 5 consecutive minutes without support. In 1 month, he took his first independent steps. Only 3, but they were the most important 3 steps of their family's life. Claire documented everything meticulously, creating a development portfolio that would impress any specialist. But more than the physical milestones, Luke's emotional transformation was extraordinary. Auntie Claire, when I grow up, will I be strong like Daddy? Luke asked during a stretching session. You're already strong, my prince, and you'll get stronger every single day. Edward watched these interactions with growing admiration. Claire wasn't just applying professional techniques, she loved Luke genuinely, treating him like her own son. And Luke responded to that love with progress that defied every medical prognosis. A month and a half after her official hiring, Claire proposed something bold. Edward, I want you to schedule a consultation with Dr. Miranda, the neurologist who said Luke would never develop significant motor skills. Why? Edward asked. Because I want him to see for himself what his so-called lost cause has achieved. The appointment was set for a Thursday. Dr. Miranda, a stern man in his 60s, welcomed Edward with his usual pessimistic expression. Edward, I hope you're not here with false hopes based on minor improvements. I already explained. He was interrupted when Luke walked into the office on his own, without crutches, without support, taking firm, steady steps. The doctor instantly paled. "This is impossible, doctor," Miranda whispered, removing his glasses to clean the lenses as if he were hallucinating. Luke walked straight to the doctor's desk and said with the clarity of a perfectly developed 3-year-old, "Doctor, Auntie Claire says I'm really smart and that I can do everything other kids do." The doctor looked at Edward, then at Claire, completely at a loss. "Who is this woman?" "This is Claire Sanders," Edward replied firmly. "A pedagogue specialized in child development and the person who proved you were completely wrong about my son." Dr. Miranda examined Luke for a full hour, testing reflexes, coordination, and both cognitive and motor development. Every test confirmed the impossible. The child he had once written off was developing within normal parameters. "Miss Sanders," he finally said, "what you've accomplished is extraordinary. In 30 years of practice, I have never witnessed such a complete neurological reversal." Claire smiled humbly. "Doctor, Luke always had the potential. He just needed someone to believe in him." When they left the office, Edward hugged Claire for the first time. "You didn't just save my son, you gave me back hope." But neither Edward nor Claire imagined that someone very powerful was already watching. Luke progressed with disapproval and that a family storm was about to threaten everything they had built. 3 days after the triumphant consultation with Dr. Miranda, Edward came home and found Claire crying uncontrollably in the garden, clutching a framed photo against her chest. Luke was napping after an intense exercise session, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. "Claire, what happened?" Edward rushed over, worried. She lifted her swollen red eyes, and for the first time since they met, Edward saw a pain so deep it made him involuntarily step back. "Today marks 5 years," she whispered, showing him the photo. Edward looked at the image, an ultrasound of a baby with a date from 5 years earlier written in the corner. Beside it, a small blue hospital bracelet with the name Michael Sanders, Jr. "My son," Claire said, her voice breaking. "He would be 5 years old today, the same age Luke will be in 2 years. Edward felt a lump in his throat. "Claire, I didn't know you." "No, you don't understand," she interrupted, wiping her tears harshly. "I never told you the full truth about why I stopped working with special children." She took a deep breath, preparing to reveal the secret she had carried for years. Michael Jr. also had cerebral palsy. When we found out during the ultrasound, I studied obsessively about the condition. I read every article, learned every method, specialized precisely to help my own son. Edward sat beside her on the garden bench, realizing he was about to hear something devastating. "When the accident happened and I lost the baby, it wasn't just Michael's death that destroyed me. It was the certainty that I would never be able to put into practice everything I had learned to help my own special child." The tears returned, streaming down her face. "Edward, every technique I use with Luke, every exercise, every word of encouragement, it's everything I once dreamed of doing with my own son." Edward's heart shattered. He finally understood the intensity of the love Claire showed for Luke, the almost maternal dedication, the deep and intuitive knowledge of his needs. "Luke isn't just a patient to you," he murmured. "Luke is my son," Claire confessed, sobbing. "In my mind, in my heart, I'm raising the boy I lost. I'm giving him everything Michael Jr. never got the chance to have." At that moment, a cold and cutting voice echoed across the garden. What a touching scene. "A maid who thinks she's a mother to my grandson." Edward and Claire turned at once. Beatrice Fisher, Edward's mother and one of the most influential women in Snow Paulo, walked toward them with her usual imperial bearing. At 70 years old, she carried an intimidating elegance and a gaze that could freeze fire. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Edward stood immediately. "I came to see for myself the absurd rumors circulating about a miraculous recovery of Luke, and I find this." She gestured disdainfully toward Claire, a mentally unstable woman projecting her traumas onto a vulnerable child. "Mars, Beatrice, with all due respect," Claire tried to defend herself. "Silence," Beatrice cut her off. I had you investigated, Claire Sanders. I know about your resignation from the clinic, about your emotional instability, about how you abandoned your profession because you couldn't handle your own tragedy. Edward felt anger boiling inside him. Mother, you have no right to. I have every right when it comes to the safety of my grandson, she retorted sharply. Edward, this woman is using Luke to resolve her own psychological issues. It's dangerous. It's sick. Beatrice opened a folder she was carrying and began to read aloud. Psychiatric report on Claire Sanders. Patient presents pathological grief, inadequate emotional transference, and tendencies of maternal substitution. And you want to expose Luke to this? Claire turned pale. That report was from 2 years earlier when she had sought psychological help after abandoning her career. Edward, Beatrice continued coldly, I have already arranged for the best specialists in London to take care of Luke. He will travel with me next week. What? Edward exploded. And as for you, she turned to Claire with absolute disdain, you are fired immediately, and there is already a court order preventing you from approaching this family again. At that moment, Luke appeared in the doorway of the house, rubbing his sleepy little eyes. Auntie Claire, why are you crying? He asked innocently. Beatrice's answer to that question would change everything once again. Auntie Claire, why are you crying? Luke repeated, walking toward her with his little legs still shaky but determined. Beatrice looked at her grandson with a mix of love and disapproval. Luke, dear, Auntie Claire has to leave. Grandma will take care of you now. I don't want Auntie Claire to leave, Luke shouted, clinging to Claire's leg with all the strength of his 3 years. She teaches me to be strong. Edward felt something explode inside his chest. Mother, you are not taking my son anywhere. Edward, be reasonable, Beatrice replied, her voice dripping with authority. This woman is using unproven methods on a vulnerable child. And you, blinded by whatever you feel for her, are putting Luke at risk. Risk? Edward laughed bitterly. Mother, Luke is walking. He's speaking clearly. He's developing like a normal child for the first time in his life. Temporary development based on artificial stimuli, she countered. Dr. Enrique Vasconcelos, the best pediatric neurologist in Europe, analyzed the case and said these improvements are superficial. Luke needs serious treatment, not emotional theater. Claire knelt to meet Luke at his eye level, wiping away his tears as he clung to her. Luke, do you remember what Auntie always tells you? You are strong and brave, he answered, his little voice trembling. That's right. No matter what happens, I am strong, Luke said firmly, though his eyes were still full of tears. Beatrice stepped closer, trying to pick him up. Come, darling, let's go to Grandma's house. No, Luke shouted, clutching Claire even tighter. I want to stay with Daddy and Auntie Claire. This is my home. Edward saw the desperation in his son's face and made a decision. Mother, if you try to take Luke from this house, I will call the police myself. Edward, I have temporary custody, Beatrice said coldly, showing official documents. The judge agreed the child is being exposed to experimental treatments by an emotionally unstable woman. Claire stood up, her face pale but determined. Mars, Beatrice, I understand your concerns, but you can confirm with Dr. Miranda. Luke has undergone every medical exam. He is clinically healthy. Under the supervision of a woman who sees ghosts of her dead son in every child she treats? Beatrice retorted cruelly. Edward stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. How dare you? Wake up, Edward. This woman is using you and Luke to fill a void in her destroyed life. She doesn't love Luke. She loves the illusion of the son she lost. Luke began crying again, overwhelmed by the tension he couldn't understand. Claire picked him up, whispering soothing words in his ear. Maybe, Mrs. Beatrice is right, Claire said suddenly, her voice barely audible. Edward turned to her, shocked. What are you saying? Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe I am using Luke to heal my own wounds, she continued, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to hurt this boy because of my trauma. Claire, no. You saved our son. Edward protested. Beatrice smiled triumphantly. See? Even she recognizes the truth. Claire kissed Luke's forehead and handed him to Edward. Edward, I'll leave. But please, don't let anyone convince Luke that he's incapable. He is special, but not in the way everyone thinks. She turned to go pack her things, but was stopped by a small, firm voice. Auntie Claire, wait. Everyone turned. Luke had slipped from his father's arms and was walking determinedly toward Claire without crutches, without support, with a steadiness that left even Beatrice speechless. I love you, Auntie Claire, he said, hugging her legs. You taught me that I can do anything. And then Luke did something no one expected, something that would prove, once and for all, who was right in that family battle. Luke let go of Claire's embrace and, to everyone's shock, began to run. Not hesitant steps, not wobbly movements. He ran across the garden with the motor coordination of a perfectly normal child, laughing as he circled the trees. Look, Grandma. Look, Daddy. I can run like the other kids, he shouted, radiant with joy. Beatrice stood frozen, in total shock. Her eyes followed every movement of her grandson, unable to process what she was seeing. The boy the world's best doctors had written off was now running, jumping, and showing abilities that completely defied his medical diagnosis. This is impossible, she murmured. Luke stopped running and returned to Claire. Auntie Claire, tell Grandma about Michael. Edward frowned. Michael? Who is Michael? Luke, honey. Claire paled instantly. She had never told Luke that story. He's Auntie Claire's little boy who's in heaven, Luke answered innocently. She told me he had weak legs like mine, and she studied a lot to help him. But he had to go to heaven before she could. Claire froze, her breath caught. How do you know that, my love? She asked, kneeling down to him. Because sometimes I dream about him, Luke said naturally. He told me you were going to teach me to walk, since you couldn't teach him, and that I need to be strong so you won't be sad. The silence that followed was absolute. The silence that followed was absolute. Edward looked at Claire, who was crying silently. Beatrice was visibly shaken, struggling to maintain her composure. Luke, Beatrice finally spoke, her voice trembling. Can you really do all this on your own? Yes, Grandma. Want to see? Luke ran to a small bench in the garden and climbed up all by himself, something that would have been impossible for a child with severe cerebral palsy. Auntie Claire taught me that I can do anything. I just need to believe and practice a lot. At that moment, Doctor, Miranda, who had discreetly arrived during the heated discussion, summoned earlier by Edward through a message, stepped out from behind a tree where he had been quietly observing. Mars. Beatrice, he said respectfully, as the neurologist responsible for this case, I can state categorically that what we have just witnessed is one of the most extraordinary cases of neurological recovery in modern medicine. Beatrice turned sharply toward him. Doctor? Miranda? How did you? Edward asked me to observe Luke in a natural environment, and what I saw today completely changes my professional perspective. He approached Claire directly. Miss Sanders, your methods are not just effective, they are revolutionary. Luke ran to his grandmother and took her hand. Grandma, you don't need to take me away. I'm happy here with Daddy and Auntie Claire. And look how strong I am. Beatrice looked at her grandson, truly looked at him for the first time. She saw a healthy, happy, confident boy, full of life. Nothing like the fragile, limited child she had known. Edward, she said slowly, hesitating. Perhaps I was wrong. But the most surprising revelation was still to come. Luke walked up to Claire and whispered something in her ear that made her heart stop. Auntie Claire, Michael told me you're my mother from the heart, and that he asked God to let you find me. Claire staggered back, staring at the boy in total astonishment. Luke, how do you... And he told me one more thing, Luke continued, his eyes shining with a wisdom beyond his years. That Daddy needs you too, because he's been very lonely since Mommy Helen went to heaven. Edward felt his knees weaken. Luke had never spoken of Helen. He was too young when she died to have any conscious memory of his mother. Doctor? Miranda watched the scene with scientific fascination. Cases of extrasensory perception in children with atypical neurological development are not uncommon. Luke may be accessing information in ways we do not fully understand. Beatrice slowly stepped forward, her defenses finally collapsing. Claire, I owe you an apology. You're not an opportunist or an unstable woman. You are exactly what this family needed. Claire wiped her tears and looked at Beatrice with respect. Mrs. Beatrice, you were only protecting Luke. That's understandable. I would be cautious too, in your place. Luke, Beatrice said, kneeling to his level, do you really want to stay here with Daddy and Auntie Claire? Yes, Grandma. I'm happy here. Auntie Claire teaches me new things every day. Today she's going to teach me how to ride a bike. Edward looked at Claire, surprised. A bike? With training wheels, of course, Claire smiled. His balance has improved so much I thought it was time to introduce new challenges. Dr. Miranda shook his head in amazement. Miss Sanders, you must document your methods. This could revolutionize cerebral palsy treatment worldwide. In the months that followed, the Fisher family's life was completely transformed. Luke began attending a regular school, participating in adapted sports activities, and blossomed into an extroverted, confident child. His story inspired hundreds of other families with special children. Claire and Edward developed a partnership that went far beyond the professional. Edward learned to be a present, participative father, while Claire rediscovered her passion for helping children. Together, they created a child development institute that offered free treatment for low-income families. Beatrice, transformed by the experience, became the strongest supporter of Claire's methods, financing research and helping expand the institute. 6 months later, on a sunny afternoon in the garden, Luke was running free and happy when he stopped in front of Edward and Claire, who were discussing future plans. Daddy, Auntie Claire, he said seriously, are you two going to get married? Edward and Claire exchanged glances, shy smiles forming on their faces. Why do you ask that, champ? Edward replied. Because Michael told me you love each other. And families that love each other should stay together forever. Edward reached out his hand to Claire. Well, if Michael said so, Claire intertwined her fingers with his. Then I think Michael was right about many things. Luke clapped his hands, radiant. Can I be the ring bearer? 1 year later, in the very same garden where everything had begun, Edward and Claire were married in an intimate ceremony. Luke, now a fully developed, thriving child, was the proudest ring bearer in the world. During the reception, he walked up to Claire, stunning in her simple yet elegant dress. Mommy Claire, he said, for the first time calling her that officially, thank you for teaching me to fly. Claire's eyes filled with tears. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, and thank you for teaching me to dream again. At that very moment, a blue butterfly landed on Luke's shoulder, something everyone present interpreted as a sign of approval from little Michael. Finally at peace, knowing his mother had found a new reason to live, Edward wrapped his arms around his new family, watching Luke run freely across the garden, full of joy. A simple maid had entered their lives and transformed everything, proving that miracles happen when love arrives at just the right moment to bloom. And so, in the mansion that had once echoed with silence and sorrow, there now resounded every day the most beautiful sound in the world, the laughter of a child who had learned there are no limits when you are loved, supported, and believed in. Because behind every ordinary person, there may be an angel in disguise, waiting for the right moment to change your life forever.